don't give a fuck. You're tripping with JJ.
Wow!
Fuck you, asshole.
Tell your bitch I said hi, nigga.
Any crimes in this room.
Welcome, everybody. I am your host, JJ, and you are on Tripping with Motherfucking JJ podcast. Today we have a super duper special guest in the building, okay? She's like extra special, you know what I'm saying? Super extra special. She's a former Olympian, ex-wrestler, KELSEY Campbell. Give it up for KELSEY Campbell. We love KELSEY. Okay? So KELSEY, when you was a wrestler, obviously you're going through a lot of competition. You got to train your body, train your mind, situate your spirit to be very competitive against your competition. How did you prepare on a daily basis to stay that focus?
It's been really interesting because when you're in the middle of something, and I think this goes for anything in life, like when I say anything, I mean when you're focusing on a specific goal, you get so zeroed in that you're not thinking about what are all the things I need to do. I think as humans, we do that. We're like, what are all the things I need to do to accomplish this? But when you're actually on track for something so specific, it's not like that. I feel like it's more like early on, you come across, you're like, oh, I need to focus on this. And then you start that. And then you organically are like, oh, I need to focus on this. And then very gradually those things build. It's a journey. Everyone's journey is different. And my journey in terms of wrestling in the Olympics was and still is so rogue, and I just to this date I have never really come across anybody that has even a similar path that I had, but I do believe there's quite a few wrestlers that have gone on to the Olympics, my former opponents, people that have gone on to win medals that have had quite a few similarities to my path, even though their journey was different ultimately. But I think in terms of staying focused, to answer your question, it's not so overwhelming. I mean, when you're focused on a goal, when you're really focused on a goal that you really want, like for all the right reasons, quote unquote, and you're just determined, and that is like the only option you're giving yourself. You're just focusing on the next step. I feel like, at least for me, it was like that. I mean, certainly there were overwhelming moments, but looking back, I'm like, yeah, those things kind of all came, like the dieting and the training and the training with the right people and training at the right places and connecting with the right sponsors, all that stuff kind of happened organically. I had people that I wanted to connect with, but I think when you just start to make the right decisions and kind of aim yourself towards a specific goal like that, you just naturally navigate to those things. So it becomes less of a checklist and more of a just focus on what's in front of you.
Right. You started this whole journey on a bet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you started tryouts basically to challenge yourself and see if you could establish what you set yourself out to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a small potatoes type gig. It was like a handful of high school boys that didn't think I could last 2 weeks. I mean, I wasn't trying to do it. I mean, you think when you're in high school, you think high school is the world, right? So, I mean, from that standpoint, yeah, it was like a big deal for me to prove these kids wrong. But, I mean, mostly I did other sports, but that wasn't what I was naturally good at. I was always naturally good at music and dance. And so to even be an an athlete in terms of like competing against other individual sport athletes, that was more just trying to prove to them that I could do it. It wasn't, oh, this is like something I planned on anyways. I didn't plan to wrestle in high school. Like, I had no plans for that. I had no plans to wrestle after high school. I had no plans to wrestle after those 2 weeks. And the more that I revisit this journey and tell people, the more I'm like, yeah, that was actually really random. This actually isn't like, no, people don't just, they don't take things up on a bet and then it becomes their career. That's not the norm. So it was very, yeah, it was, I did it to win a bet. I kept doing it because these teammates became family, and then I kept doing it even further because my coaches in high school, they were the ones who were like, oh, there's tournaments for girls. There's places you can go to compete. And it was like that. It was like inches, you know? It was like, oh, here's something you could go to. And then I go and I don't win, but I compete really well. And I'm like, oh, I could be good against people like me, like females.
Right.
And it was like that. It was, and you think, oh, Olympics. But at that time, the Olympics had just been introduced for women's wrestling. It wasn't, I mean, I started wrestling in 2002, 2003. The first Olympics for wrestling was 2004. So it was just such a young emerging sport. And I was such a young wrestler that I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I was still like, I'm going to be a singer for the next whatever.
So even during this time where you was trying out for wrestling, in your mind you was preparing for wrestling and you was set out to achieve this goal, you still had music in the back of your mind to some degree where you're like, I want to do this, but I prefer to be doing music.
I can't, okay, so my senior year of high school, when I was doing all this, like I know that I kept myself busy on purpose. Like I was one of those people that was like, I needed to be out of my house as much as possible and just busy doing stuff. So the motivation to be busy wasn't difficult, but it's weird because with wrestling, I really just showed up to practice and did what the coach told me. It wasn't like I left and I was like, my mind was brimming with all these things I needed to do because I barely knew how to do anything. So how could I have known what to prepare for outside of practice? And then for music, like in my high school, we had senior projects, you know, like that culminating capstone thing that you do. And, you know, I had friends that they created pamphlets and they created like jogathons and like very manageable, awesome things, right? I did a concert. I did a concert with backup dancers and I had hosts and I had flyers and I literally advertised at the surrounding high school. I mean, it was like, this is not weird for 2021, but in 2002, this was super weird and innovative, and kids were not doing this.
Right.
So to answer your question, yeah, I was going to wrestling practice, winning a bet, and then in school, I had to keep my grade. I wasn't a naturally good student, but I had to be a good student because of athletics. But at school was hard for me. I still to this day believe that I don't learn the way that I don't learn traditionally. Like I think I did struggle a little bit in the way that I learned.
So you just needed more help.
Even in college, I struggled a lot, but this wasn't something that was discussed back then, you know?
Gotcha.
But yeah, like I was just pursuing being a musician, and I was very aware as a high school student back then that to be a singer that's not something that like you brag about. There wasn't even social media to brag about it. And it was like, okay, so what are you going to do in college? Like, so what are you going to do to make money? Like,
right.
That's so nice that you sing, you're so good, but what are you going to do for a living?
Right.
Like, it just wasn't something you talked about. You didn't make money being influential with your artistic abilities like you can now. So it was just so different. So, you know, wrestling happened and I really saw an opportunity, and it wasn't like an opportunity, oh, I'll use music to catapult me in this. It was just like, at that age even, I was like, oh, like, I have a very short window to do this. I'm going to pursue this. And I'm good enough at music that I can come back to this. And
Nice.
for real, like, it's weird. Like, my mindset back then, with all my insecurities and whatever, I still was clear about what I was going to accomplish in my life. I was very clear. I was going to be a singer. I was just going to pause it for a while because, for a season, AKA a couple years, I was going to do this sport,
Right. So one of your biggest challenges throughout your career was that you hurt your shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah, you must have really dug because I don't talk about that a lot. I've talked about it a little bit, but not a lot. So I've always been, leading up to London and even Rio, I always did a lot of extra stuff that I didn't talk to people about. There were many days where I did multiple workouts. I would go to, obviously I was a resident at the Olympic Training Center, but then I had my one-on-one coach, and I would go to his gym and do workouts with him, and he was brilliant. And I had seen him take underdogs into medal matches at the Olympics, and he was a coach for the club I wrestled for, and I was very soft-skinned back then. I was younger, but I was like, I don't really care what he puts me through. I want to be like those athletes.
Right.
And so I did a lot of extra training, and leading up to London, I had made the team, and it was like June-ish. The Olympics were like end of August, September. And I still remember, it's crazy because I still remember the first time I felt my collarbone pop. Like, I remember the workout.
Was that during the practice?
It was a practice, but it wasn't like a national team practice. It wasn't like a prep camp. It was like
scrimmage?
I was like training with a wrestler. She was an age group. By that I mean she was like in a younger age group. She was in high school still, and she was just someone I kind of mentored and trained with a lot. I was actually in Texas, and I was training with her, and I remember we were at this MMA gym. I can't remember the name.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember we were doing some technique, and I felt a pop. It didn't even hurt. It was just like a pop. I was like, and that was the first time I noticed it. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And it got to the point where, like, I couldn't, like, shoot in on a leg without, like, seeing red. It was so painful.
Wow.
And seriously, back then, like, people didn't post when they were having surgery. Like, it was just, social media was just, it's ever changing, but back then people just weren't as transparent about that stuff. Unless you were like Kobe Bryant, like, unless you were like the best in the world, like, nobody talked about those things. And certainly I didn't talk about those things.
So you kept it from your coach?
My coach knew, but I'd made the Olympic team, and when you make the team in a sport like that, people are like looking at you like, oh, if they test positive or if they get hurt, like, I'm next in line.
What year was that you made the Olympics?
2012.
Right.
And so I was very private about it. There was probably like 3 people that knew really how bad the injury was. My national team coach, the head of my main sponsor, and my main physical therapist at the training center. And I did get surgery after the Olympics, but leading up to it, it took us a while to even figure out what was wrong. And when we found out the injury, I did so much research because I couldn't even train the way that I knew how.
Right.
I couldn't do anything without pain.
Right.
And we didn't know what it was, so to even treat it was tricky. But I was diligent, and what I found, like, there was maybe like 3 or 5 surgeries ever in the U.S. that addressed this type of injury, and they weren't wrestlers. They were like baseball players and swimmers. I mean, so when you find that type of information, my PTs at the Olympic Training Center, like the best in the country, are like, yeah, we don't recommend surgery. But I'm like, okay, well, if I don't try something, my career is over. I can't
wrestle.
I can't even train with people 2 weight classes below me right now.
Right. So then you found the doctor who answered your prayers, and he said he could get you to 98%.
You really dug. That's very specific, yes. Yeah, like I was doing a speaking tour in New York, and there was this, I don't remember exactly how I came across him, but it was very serendipitous. It was like I overheard a volunteer PT in Colorado talking about, I think I was talking about my injury, and this volunteer heard me and was like, I know a couple surgeons that could do that. I mean, it was like, if I had been talking quieter, he wouldn't have heard me. You know, it was like that.
Yeah.
It was like
one of those things.
It was one of those things. And so I was doing a speaking tour in New York after the Olympics, and the surgeon also happened to be the team doctor for USA Swimming. And USA Swimming is like kind of a higher clout sport, right? They're like
superior athletes.
It's not that. It's more that they're more mainstream, so they attract more funding. They attract more fans. So there's just more, because there's more money, there's more quality in their support stuff. I mean,
they can afford it.
They can afford it, right? So I felt like, okay, this is a USA Swimming team doctor. Like he's, and Phelps was still competing, just to give you an idea. These are the athletes that this doctor is dealing with.
Wow.
Right?
Huge.
And so I knew that I was like, he deals with like the best of the best. And I remember scheduling the consult. We delayed my return trip a day. I went and saw him. And you have to understand, like, everyone I had seen in Colorado, the people that I had been seeing for years and years and years living there, all of them told me not to get surgery. All of them discouraged me doing anything other than physical therapy. And I couldn't like unbutton my shirt without my collarbone popping.
Wow, it's painful.
Yeah, and there wasn't a rehab on the planet that was gonna help me with that.
Wow.
So
that was like a miracle for you.
it was. And so when he told me that I don't remember the exact, I think he said like 97, 98%. When he told me he could get me there, I got emotional because it had been so long and a heartbreaking Olympic experience. I just, when you hear bad news for so long, it just moves you to hear good news. Like, it's one of those things where you're like, I'm not crazy. I knew that there was something I could do.
Right.
And we did the surgery, and to the dismay of a lot of my, like, immediate support staff. I mean, I have really, really horrible experiences after I decided to it's just weird how people are people at the end of the day, regardless of their title. And
what do you mean, it was not supportive?
Like, I would, like, after I decided to get the surgery, I would go in to do, like, rehab. Because when you do surgery, you do physical therapy. That's normal.
Hand in hand.
And I would go in and, like, therapists just wouldn't show up. Or they'd just show up late and they'd be like, oh, you didn't tell me you were here. Like, that kind of stuff happened just like petty stuff, right? And it was just like...
What was your response to that?
I mean, I was a younger person. I was a younger athlete. And
right.
I at that point, I still would just bite my tongue a lot.
Right.
I was much more polite back then than I am now.
Hard lessons.
I had never had to fight for myself so much. That was the first time in my athletic career that I had to fight for I had always had to fight to improve, but this was different than just getting on the mat and fighting to get your hand raised. This was like the you have the street smart and the book smart, right? You know how there's those contrasts in, like, experience. This wasn't like a hand-to-hand battle. This was like a different type of battle where I'm literally going against professional input, and I'm trusting myself, and because I got a different medical opinion, and I was trusting myself as an athlete, the number one athlete in the U.S. I mean, the pushback was real, and it was not fun, and then I was going through some mental health stuff, which also wasn't really discussed back then anywhere on social media or anywhere else. And I decided that I needed to leave the training center. I mean, it got really hard, and there was a lot of backlash and pushback. And so the fact that I do fight for myself now and I am more vocal, I mean, that didn't just happen. Like, I just went through things in my career that I look back and I'm like, it's unfortunate. Like, it didn't need to be that way.
So you would have done it differently, needless to say.
I mean, I would have still gotten the surgery because he lived up to it. I had the surgery, rehabbed it back to 100% in 6 months, textbook. Like, there was no literature on this surgery before I had it. None. We made up a lot of the rehab, me and my PT. There's a ton of shoulder surgery, but this was a collarbone injury, so it was a little different. And I have never had an incident since the surgery ever.
Wow.
Ever. So, I mean, I made the right choice.
Wow.
And I kept competing.
Wow.
I made another U.S. Olympic team, and I competed for a few more years on the national team until I finally did retire. So I did make the right decision, and I think that the response I got from my team was the wrong response, and I can't do anything about that. And that's not something I've ever really said super candidly. But the way that I was treated because I chose to get surgery, it was like, that's like the stuff that no one talks. A lot of athletes, I mean, unless you watch documentaries like The Weight of Gold or Athlete A or whatever, unless you watch that stuff, you don't really see the politics in sports. All people mostly see is like every 4 years, people are doing these
Showing
inspiring
up.
things.
Right,
but
right.
it's like,
It's a lot going on.
for us, it's like day in and day out, and it's people, and it's politics, and it's playing
Right.
the game and all that.
Right. So how in the hell could your team give you backlash or just be non-supportive when you're going through such difficult time?
I mean, I think, I can't, they'd probably tell you whatever. I guess all I can say is, at the end of the day, and what I've learned through that experience, and also just social media, if you spend any time on social media and if you have opinion about anything, you see like, oh, people are just people.
Right.
People are just people. And when people are behind a screen, they become more brave about their opinions and less accountable for their sources and less accountable for their behavior. And looking back, I guess all I can say is, I think that I just bruised some egos not following their advice, and they were wrong.
So you don't regret that?
I don't regret it. How can I regret it? Like, to this day, this injury is not... I have a lot of chronic body issues from years of wrestling. That injury is not an injury I still deal with. I don't rehab that injury. The most I have is I have some tightness around my collarbone, but most people that never competed in sports have that.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's surgery. That's like part of it.
Right.
I've had like no issues with that injury. I mean, I had that surgery in 2013. We're going on 10 years.
Right.
And so, but I have other injuries.
Like what?
Like I have, degenerative disc disease, which is pretty common with wrestlers. I have a lot of neck issues. I have a lot of lower back issues. That's very common with wrestlers. I know wrestlers 5-10 years younger than me that have had double hip surgery and that have had neck surgery and that have their careers ended because they had too many concussions. I mean, there's like, I have so between my neck and my lower back, it's like I have enough where I actually still see a chiropractor once or twice a week. I still get dry needling done and tissue work, and I still do rehab every day because I have like chronic pain from years of this, but that surgery, like, I have no issues with that. It's just, and there's no like prize or, you know,
Right.
there's no return on investment, I guess, ROI. I'm like, what did I, like, isn't that what they called that?
Yeah.
There's no return for being right. It's, you just know. And that's what it is, right? That's like what so many things are these days. In a digital era, you kind of just have to know where you stand on stuff.
Right.
So,
Good. Well, I'm happy you pushed through that and move on with your life. Now, you did meet the president.
I've met 2 presidents, actually.
Right. And you did meet Michelle Obama.
Yes.
How was that experience for you?
It was awesome. Like, I've met Michelle Obama 3 times, and the 3rd time she acted like she recognized me, so who knows? I mean, I guess when you meet people as much as the former First Lady does, like, you kind of, I don't know, you assume you've met everyone, but it felt special. Going to the White House, so it's like tradition to, like, if you make a U.S. Olympic team, I don't really know the details, but basically all USA athletes have the opportunity to meet, like, they have the opportunity to go to the White House.
Right.
And I know in 2016, quite a few athletes went, and then it's really ironic that 2020 Olympics were delayed because, I mean, I don't know that a lot of the athletes would have gone, you know? It was delayed to 2021.
Right.
But when I went, because I was, so after the Olympics, every year we have a World Championships, and after the Olympics, like a month or 2 later, there's a World Championships. And I would have competed. I would have tried to compete in that, but I was so injured that I literally, I was training and trying to, but my injury had gotten so bad that, and this is before the surgery, I opted out, and I had actually missed the deadline to go to the White House. And it's ironic that you bring this up because my Facebook brought up a memory of me saying, thanks so much to the USOC for making this happen. And it was because I had missed the deadline because I thought I was going to compete, but there was no way with my collarbone. And so after the deadline, last minute, they managed to get my ticket, get me a room, and I was able to go. I wasn't even planning on going. It was very last minute. So I flew in later than all the other USA athletes. The whole event was held outside when we actually shook their hand, which is different now. I think they do it indoors now. And I remember Jordan Burroughs was in front of me in line, and he's like the face of wrestling. And smartphones weren't what they are now. They don't, you know. And I remember, I don't know if he's ever shared this story, so I don't know if this is like off limits, but whatever. I remember he was like, so you kind of had to ask people to take pictures for you. And I had a crappy phone. It was like crappy. And so I was like, there's no point in asking anyone. I don't even know if I'll get a good picture, which is so stupid looking back. But he had asked me to take his picture, and he's like, you have one shot. And I was so nervous because he had just won a gold medal in London. And I was like, oh my gosh.
Right.
So he went, and I took his picture. And it was a great picture, by the way. If you look up Jordan Burroughs, I took that picture. And then I went and I shook President Obama's hand, and then I shook Vice President Joe Biden's hand. And Michelle Obama was there. And then like a month later, my dietitian from the training center, she had gotten a job offer to work for a pro baseball team. So she like left the Olympic movement, which happens a lot. There's a lot of great people that leave and they go pro. It's better money and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And she sent me these pictures. She's like, I thought you'd like these. She took pictures of me. So like, I actually didn't plan that. I was winging it. Like we were a pre-social media era for, you know, all whatever.
Right.
And so I was so grateful to have those images because that was like such a cool experience. I met some other politicians that now that I actually pay attention to that stuff, I'm like, I actually could have been fine without meeting you ever.
Right.
But it was like a very cool opportunity to meet them. So, I mean, to meet a president in your lifetime is awesome. To meet two, I feel like super, super lucky and honored
Right.
to have met both of them.
And you didn't take pictures with both of them.
I didn't take any, but I got pictures. I have pictures of me shaking President Joe Biden's hand. I have pictures shaking former President Barack Obama's hand. And I have tons of pictures with Michelle Obama. So,
Do you regret meeting Obama or Biden, looking back now?
no, not at all.
Okay.
I'm so grateful. It's like I frame the pictures and they're like in my living room, and I'm like
Super proud.
I'm so proud of that experience. That's like,